The left think we're just evil. We think the left's misguided. They think we're evil. It's so unfair. Do you think people who are right-wing, who are conservative, are not nice people?
I don't agree with them kind of labels because I think it's very prohibitive and will prevent us advancing. So I would never condemn anyone as being not a nice person. But like that brilliant Russian writer who spent most of his days in the old gulag as a consequence of this kind of belief system said, he was called Solzhenitsyn. He said, the line between good and evil runs not between cultures, religions or creeds, but through every human heart. So I recognise in myself the capacity for selfishness, for lustfulness, for egotism, and because I recognise these qualities in myself, I would prefer a culture that didn't celebrate, exacerbate, stimulate the most negative aspects of our species, inculcate them, reward them financially, till we get to a kind of a cultural hysteria where we're destroying the planet.
A new best friend.
What's interesting, I think, about Adam Curtis's films is he takes big political themes and global geopolitical issues and points out how the motivations behind them ultimately are quite sort of interpersonal and simple, because no matter what the scale is upon which these events are taking place, it's ultimately derived from human emotions, human feelings and human needs. So things like greed and jealousy and manipulation, anger, all these things, these are the ultimate players, what in the Greek pantheistic terms would be called the gods or the humors or the furies, the great forces that are within us all. Many people died, great tragedy, affects people to this day. That in itself becomes subject to, what do I want to say, Machiavellian manoeuvring by the geopolitical class, and that there's a sort of a very jarring amorality about that. And like, even though Adam Curtis is telling us and I'm passing on the information to you, you kind of already know it, don't you? You have this sense of unease, and that's what this film Hypernormalization captures very well, the sense of unease that one is left with when you recognise that the world you're living in isn't telling you the truth. And what does one do when you feel like that? You have to kind of detach.
You have to accept, or you had to accept at that time, the responsibility, because you have to accept responsibilities, you have to pay compensation in order to get rid of the sanction. It means we did that not because we are convinced that we did it, but because to find an exit out of this nightmare.
I like this, that's Colonel Gaddafi's son there saying we took responsibility for Lockerbie, not because we did it, but around addiction and the problems around addiction. That it's a mental and social, it's a social disorder to a point, but it begins as a mental and emotional and spiritual disorder. People that take drugs and drink to excess are trying to deal with a spiritual pain and emotional pain. And these spiritual and emotional pain is deeply exacerbated by the materialistic conditions that we live in. Living in a world where you think that your problems can be solved by consuming in some way or another. In a way, addiction is just the extreme conclusion, a natural endpoint to a culture that tells you that all of your problems can be resolved by purchasing, acquiring and consuming. The more and more you recognise that problem, speaking from personal experience, the more you recognise that you can't reach any kind of spiritual solution by consuming, the more it seems obvious that you've got to try more and more extreme measures to deal with your inner malady. A spiritual program, but it works if you're atheist as well. Spiritual just means sort of kindness and tolerance and a willingness to change yourself, and the acceptance that nothing from outside of you can ever make you feel better. And that goes way beyond drugs and alcohol and right out into relationships and work and money and fame and sex and everything. Total acceptance that none of those things will ever work for you. And when you look at addiction like that and mental illness like that, what you realise is the right messages are not available. So you can't treat addiction as something that's got to be sort of crushed or pounded down or grounded into. You have to look at, well, what is this basin? What is the crucible? What is the fulcrum of these conditions? It's a society that tells you that you have to be successful as an individual, that your feelings are secondary, that that the way to solve all of your problems is by acquiring things. If you look at how often you receive that message over the course of a day, it's bamboozling and baffling even to contemplate. Even if you sort of stay in your house all day, the message will hit you.
I think that just shows the direct relationship between taking drugs and not feeling emotions, and not taking drugs and feeling emotions, and therefore the obligation.
And that is why people take drugs, yeah.
That I can imagine you really clearly off drugs. I can really see you. I can see you competent, driving, freestone heavier, living a life, sorted out, looking different. You know what I mean? I can really imagine it for you. That's the thing. That's the thing, more obviously than I ever have with anybody. But like, do you think you deserve to be clean? Do you think you deserve to be happy? I suppose is what I'm asking. I don't think you do think that you deserve it. I don't think anyone does. It's loads of people that are going to die if they don't stop taking drugs and drinking. That sense that I had with Amy, the sense of inevitability of it. So like when I sort of think of someone like Karen, who's also a really, really smart woman who's going to die if she doesn't stop taking drugs. That's how I see it.
No, not yet.
That's why I feel guilty, innit? Because like, I am an alcoholic junkie that got clean and I didn't do, you know, I wasn't able to do anything, you know. But
you feel guilty because of that?
a bit.
It's about Amy. She had the power in her hands to stop drinking. She was moving in that direction, but what she was doing was dangerous. It's her responsibility, nobody else's. We've got to get this message across that having an addiction is an illness. It needs to be treated just like any other illness. And until we adopt that attitude in this country, we're not going to get anywhere.
Whatever anyone could have done for Amy, now one thing is for sure, no one can do anything. She's dead. But there's probably millions of other people suffering on the same path. Loads of people that are going to die if they don't stop taking drugs and drinking. When it ain't necessary, it's like difficult for the individual, it's difficult for the family, it's detrimental for society, and it's completely unnecessary because there is a solution. Armageddon will surely come for each of us, our own personal Armageddon, when each of us die. Isn't it redundant whether everyone simultaneously dies if each of us will individually die regardless? Armageddon is coming. So whilst these cataclysmic principles apply on the individual level...
people who think we might be able to extend the human lifespan through biotechnology, merging with machines.
That's all cool, man. But what I'm saying is that what we have to do is individually reach like our own personal alignment. We have to do the principles are all there. You know this. The principles are already there. We achieve detachment through meditation. We no longer then we are no once we can achieve enlightenment and once we put our satisfaction beyond our individual needs, we are no longer malleable by the pre-existing system. The system requires us to be selfish little consumerist pods. Once we go, oh, I ain't that bothered about that. It's easier for me because I've been famous now. I know that's boring. I've been rich now. I know that's boring. Loads of people now, I know that's boring. Took loads of drugs now, no, that's boring. So all that's left is spiritual enlightenment. It's a difficult concept. For me, it is life, it is consciousness. Consciousness itself is God. You cannot allow consciousness to become refracted into an abstract idea such as individualism. Individualism is a material, sensorial, biological notion which we can conquer through the expansion of consciousness. Why live on this dimension? Why live only on this frequency once we know other frequencies exist? We have an obligation for the evolution of our species to continue to pioneer. This is the country of the pioneer.
So do you feel that you're in the running to be a messiah?
Yep! Only the true Messiah would deny his Messiah. No, I ain't bothered. I'm just going to be what I am, and that's that. Because once it goes in other people's brains, they can do what the fuck they like with it. I'm just going to be doing what I'm doing. But really, the feeling is in me, and this is what my personal experience of actually getting clean from drugs has taught me, is that, you know, what other people think about me is none of my business, and it's something that's happening in their own consciousness, and they're always looking for some coordinates upon which to project those feelings. And I know that because I fucking do it. If I start getting jealous about, you know, some super successful guy or someone who's super good at fighting or whatever, I'm dealing with something inside myself. So now I try not to bring that shit to the world. I try to go, right, Russell, you better deal with this feeling of inadequacy or this feeling of jealousy or this feeling of insecurity, because otherwise it's going to ruin your experience of being human. Instead of going, no, the problem is this guy or that guy or this person having a successful podcast, I try to go, no, Russell, connect with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, I'm trying not to blame the outside world for my shit anymore. Well, kids, don't smoke pot or you will become a heroin addict. That's literally what I did. Like, I started with recreational drugs, was unable to... And the reason is because it's not the fault of the drugs themselves. There's a component within me that is looking to find a solution that doesn't have... You see, when you have that perspective on going into a place and being willing to go in there and be vulnerable, that kind of thing for me, that makes me very sort of what I call hot, you know, like scared. Like that, oh, fuck. So for me, drugs were always a thing that I trusted to make me feel a little bit better. Like, and so when I was smoking weed, it was like, oh, right, there's that thing I found that makes me feel relaxed. When it became coke and heroin and crack, it was the same reason. It was an attempt to nullify, medicate, and contend with an inner sense of disconnectedness and discontentment.
Social interaction, this new social media world where anybody can chime in at any point in time. And this is the first time ever that that's happened.
Yeah. You might be right, because a friend of mine in England made a documentary about what has happened to the idea of the great man, you know, like in American literature, like, you know, Saul Bellow, Philip Roth, or like, you know, Muhammad Ali, rest in peace. Like, nowadays, people don't rise to that position anymore because there's thousands of Lilliputians pulling them down with tiny arrows as soon as their head's above the parapet, innit? No one's allowed to be.
Yeah.
You know, people will be, oh, well, Martin Luther King had affairs. Oh, Malcolm X, he was inside. He done this, that, and the other. You know, like, it's like there are so many good things that have come from social media. So many good things. You know, the possibility for communication, the connection, instantaneous, all those things. It's wonderful, but it does all things in the end become an expression of the dominant consciousness, you know, and if people are doubtful, cynical, pessimistic, then the pattern where culture through like corporatism is coming uniform throughout the world. But also there are many disparate experiences. But on some level, as human beings, if we're anatomically as similar as we are, perhaps it's safe to assume that we're psychologically comparably similar. Like, you know, even though you and I are sort of different body types or whatever and look sort of at a glance kind of different, we're both ultimately got the same organs, we're running in pretty much the same way, or perhaps we have the same psychological palette. So throughout the world, everyone's having a very similar experience of being human, the anxiety of not being good enough, the fear of death, constantly looking for something in the outside world that's going to solve the problems, that's going to answer your questions. And like, in a lot of these ancient texts that I've mostly got at through Joseph Campbell or, you know, Hinduism for beginners, that's normally my entry point. I, like you, am an autodidact, self-taught person. That's one of the things I like about your podcast, is you can hear, oh, this is a person educating themselves and continuing to educate themselves.
How it represents the subconscious and that going into the murky depths.
I thought you'd like that, mate.
Yeah.
What it is in fairy stories, myths and religion, a person, if you're not into him already, I reckon you'd well love, is an American scholar called Joseph Campbell, who's a cultural mythologist, and he studied various religions and folk tales and found corollaries and comparisons and consistencies, and sort of said that where there are consistencies, there's truth. If there's some Icelandic myth and it's telling basically the same story as some African story or some Native American story or some daft Celtic folk tale, why are human beings dislocated all over the world coming up with the same stories, coming up with the same experiences? Well, often in these stories, the forest is used as the unconscious. Not only the forest represents the unconscious, often in mythology, and you know, when a character has to go into the woods, that means you've got to go into yourself, you're going to have to go into new territory. And also under the water similarly also represents unconsciousness. And what it in is how much of our activity is unconscious activity.
Oh, so much.
We're doing things, we don't know why we're doing it. The book here that I'm promoting, Recovery, I've written this book, it's my version of the 12 Steps.
I read some of it last night.
You're in it?
Yeah.
The 12 Steps is a journey from unconsciousness to consciousness. That's what it essentially is. You'd unconsciously pursue pleasure, you unconsciously pursue patterns because you don't know you're doing it. If you're a smackhead or a crackhead like me, eventually it gets you into such trouble you have to address it. But most people hover along on the cheese grater level, lives of quiet desperation, never realising, hang on a minute, it is possible to be happy. As we touched on it a moment ago, Joe, if you're, like I say this, you don't choose between having a programme and not having a programme, you choose between having a conscious programme and an unconscious programme. If you're not working in a conscious programme, you are being worked by your unconscious programme. These flesh puppets, we believe so much in our identities, we believe in our individualism, and I talk as a very sort of egotistical man. Look at my hair, look at these bracelets, look at these ridiculous boots. I'm a person who believes in the nature of my own individualism and my own identity. But on a deeper level, I recognise that all these things are transient, and what's important and what's defining are the things that we all share. Love, unity, togetherness. As long as we have cultural narratives that eschew these ideas, that suppress these ideas in favour of negative human traits, greed, selfishness, lust, as long as these ideas are promoted, we'll exist in opposition to one another and will be exploitable by corporations that prey upon these negative facets of humanity. The line between good and evil runs not between cultures, religions or creeds, but through every human heart. So I recognise in myself the capacity for selfishness, for lustfulness, for egotism, and because I recognise these qualities in myself, I would prefer a culture that didn't celebrate, exacerbate, stimulate the most negative aspects of our species, inculcate them, reward them financially, till we get to a kind of a cultural hysteria where the reality is there is one planet, there is a certain amount of people on the planet, there are a certain amount of resources resources on the planet. None of them things are going to last forever. So we need systems in place that acknowledge the reality, not systems that benefit elites, but systems that acknowledge the reality. The people need to have access to the resources. Can't lie to people so that people in power can continue to augment and grow their own power and satisfaction while normal people are exploited. We need systems that get the resources to the people while respecting the planet. Any system that's detrimental to the planet or detrimental to the people because it helps one or two bods, fuck it off. We're allowed to do that, you know. We are creatures on the planet. We are mammals. Look at the faces of the people that we're being asked to vote for as leaders. Look at them. Look at them, feel it in your hearts. That ain't who's meant to be leading us. Anyone that galvanises people, brings people together and points us to the better aspects of our nature and help us to overcome our basic things like fear and desire, I think these people are worthy heroes, rather than the heroes that are nominated today, heroes that are low vibrational frequency that make us concentrate on daft stuff. So like they want you to be talking about Justin Bieber, they want you to be talking about twerking, they don't want you talking about fracking, they want you talking about twerking, they want to get on with their job. Shut your fucking mouths and watch this shit, you fucking morons. And I know, because I've been part of the charade. But, you know, I'm awake now. Look beyond the superficial. That's the problem with current affairs. You forget about what's important. You allow the agenda to be decided by superficial information. What am I saying? What am I talking about? Don't think about what I'm wearing. These things are redundant. I'm superficial. And I don't think that we should be continuing to propagate the idea that famous people are magical and special, because it makes people feel that their lives ain't no good. And I don't think we should be living in that kind of fearful paradigm.